Running effective meetings. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to ever be able to totally get rid of meetings. So instead of trying to get rid of them, let's try and have great ones. So that's what I'm hoping to share. I work at the Software Freedom Conservancy, where we also happen to have a lot of meetings, just like everywhere. The Software Freedom Conservancy is another nonprofit dedicated to promoting free software. We do that by helping projects realize their full potential and growth, and we also work on protecting the licenses. So maybe, superhero, but less spandex and beating up and more spreadsheets and contracts. And I'm happy to answer more questions about the Conservancy later, but let's get into the meetings. So, meetings. We can't get rid of them, so we got to live with them. I think, if you look at the way that people talked about computers and email and things early on, you got this sense that they thought that they were going to, we were going to share a big mind meld, and we wouldn't have to do any drudgery. We'd get rid of administration. We would never have any paperwork, and we'd probably get rid of meetings. It didn't happen. So we're going to have good ones. So why do we have meetings? I know probably I'm not the only person that's thought of this in the middle of a terribly run meeting, but there are a couple of different reasons. One of the big ones is to give context to work. So if you're doing a little bit of a large project like GNOME, right, you have your little piece, it helps you to have some context for that work so that you can understand, is cost or accuracy or speed the most important thing for your piece? Are there deadlines in other departments that make a big difference on how you might prioritize the parts of your work? And so one of the reasons that you have meetings is you say oh, I'm working on this, and someone's that sounds like it's going to be ready in 2022, and that'll make it not useful for us to use in 2021, which is what our a co-project is working on. So context is really important. You want to do work in the right order and have it work with other departments. Another, and then the opposite is true. Sometimes there's work that nobody needs to do. You might be looking at stuff and someone's oh, I've been collecting all these records as part of my work and I'm keeping them really neat and tidy. And someone's oh, we already create those logs in another place. Or actually no one is ever going to look at that because it's not useful. Or we're phasing that thing out in 3 months. So please stop optimizing collecting records from the old system because it's unfortunately not going to be very useful going forward. So one of the best things that can happen in a meeting is you find out there's work you don't have to do. You can just stop doing it and get rid of it. Yay. And then another thing that might happen is if one project is going to, or department or sub-project is going to finish something really soon and then pass it to another department or project, they might like to have some heads up on that so that they can plan, especially if you thought they were going to turn it around in a certain time frame and then pass it back. So when your work is about to become someone else's work, or someone else's work is about to become your work, it's really helpful to know that that's going to happen, but it's also helpful to know what format it's going to happen in, how complete that's going to be. Is it a draft or a test run, or is it a fully formed thing? So having a sense of when something's coming to you can help you plan for it and help you design a way to deal with what you're getting from another project or another department. So these are all the reasons that we have meetings, and sometimes you'd be why couldn't it just be email? Sometimes it could if it's a process you've done before, but sometimes if it's a new process, the part A of a process ended up a little bit in a different place than they thought they were going to when they started. Oh, our deadline suddenly sounds ridiculous, or something like that. And so telling part B of the project, hey, here's what we found out doing part A, and what we're going to hand off to you is way different than what you were expecting. So these are all ways that you help work, big group project work, become more seamless, less surprises. No one wants surprises in their work. It's always better to have a little bit of an idea of what's coming. So, setting the stage for running a good meeting, and we'll there's a couple of different things that you can do. So first of all, I know, especially in pandemic times, it's sort of tempting to call a meeting when you're lonely, but don't do that. Call a virtual happy hour if you're lonely. Don't call a meeting. And there were lonely people before the pandemic, but you can't. A meeting is not going to be the right answer for that. So, so why are you having a meeting? Sometimes you are having a big meeting and everyone's invited and everything is on the agenda. And those can be okay if it's like an occasional large all hands, like kind of for context and team spirit, like maybe once a year or something like that. But usually you want to have like a tighter invite list and a tighter agenda. So when you have those big meetings, you're going to have a lot of Q&A just to kind of, it's like to take the temperature of the whole project. But when you have a small meeting, you want to have people know what's going to be discussed and what is going to be decided. So the better of a job you can do with that, the better your meetings are going to be. So let's get into some specifics. First of all, if no one's in charge of the meeting, then it's going to be a terrible meeting. Meetings need a chair. If no one is in charge, then like kind of what happens is the person who's like the most talkative or the most opinionated or the most caffeinated ends up talking the whole time. And this is not a good meeting. No one likes these meetings except for the talker. So try not to do that. If it feels like too hierarchical to have the same person be in charge of the meeting all the time, you can rotate who the chair is. And that can help it feel a little less like, oh, this is Paul's meeting and we just all do whatever Paul says and talk about whatever Paul feels like talking about. So you can change up who the chair is. Another thing that you want to do if you have like a regular meeting is to have it be regular. So you don't want to be like, oh, like XYZ project meets approximately every month and someone decides 3 days before, like, this month's meeting is in 3 days at 2 p.m., like whatever time zone. But if you set a regular time that people can put in their calendar, you're going to have better attendance and better preparation for the meeting. If you are trying to do different time zones or different times to accommodate people in different time zones, then you have to put it like way in advance. Like you might say like that first and second, the first and third Thursday is going to be like really good for Eastern time. And then the second and fourth Tuesday meetings are going to be at like British time or something like that. So, and then you give people like months of meeting times in advance so that they can put it in their calendar. There's no surprises. There's none of this like, weirdly, since you just called this meeting for 3 days from now, like half of its participants are going to be busy. So thinking about like giving people as much notice as possible and making it regular to make it easy so that when they're thinking, they're like, like when I want to schedule something else, they just have in their mind like, oh, Tuesdays at 4 p.m. are always for that meeting, or the second Tuesday of the month, that evening is always for this meeting. And it helps people keep conflicts off, schedule conflicts off. Another thing is you want to think about like who's attending the meeting, and I mean you want to be inclusive, but you don't want to be time wasting. Like, and this comes from thinking about like what kinds of decisions are going to be made. So if you're going to be discussing somebody's work and what happens with it next, then they should be at the meeting. And then of course there's other meetings where you're talking about like personnel or HR issues, and it's like that should be a very tiny group of people. So thinking about like who really needs to be at the meeting is going to help you get some of the like not paying attention energy out of your meetings. And then even weekly meetings should have an agenda. So it can't just be like, oh, let's just chat every Wednesday. There should be some scope and some sense of what's on topic and what's off topic. Even if the agenda just says update from Committee A, Committee B, and Committee C, that's still an agenda. And then you can add stuff or rearrange the timing of those different agenda items. So you can kind of think of it as like writing the script for your meeting. Like maybe if it's all the world is a stage, then your meeting should have a script, like a opening act and a closing, where you finish having your meeting. And so some things like that you can do is think a little bit more specifically about your agenda. So updates from everyone in no particular order isn't a very good agenda. You might put like specific things. You might ask committee A, like, oh, what are you talking about? And you would have notes from last week's meeting, like committee A is going to report back on the thing that they took on last week and let us know what they need from committee B in the coming week. So like get as specific as possible as you can get is going to help you stay on topic and focused. People really like organized meetings. It seems like it sounds a little micro, but if you've ever been in a meeting that is kind of all over the place, like, you'll notice like everyone's like typing in the background, they're like chatting, shopping, whatever, like in these days, like probably petting their cat, maybe turning their camera off and eating lunch. So like if the meeting is organized and folks know exactly what's going to happen next, then they know like what's on topic, and they feel good, like we're going to address the different topics in a specific order in a way that makes sense and is going to lead us to a good outcome. So you don't want to like keep the same agenda forever. Like, so sometimes you might have, like, say you do have like a standing meeting, a committee A and committee B, and someone from committee C is just going to be part of the meeting today. Put them at the very beginning for 5 minutes to report out on what they're going to do, and then let them go. Like, you don't want people sitting around for a whole meeting that aren't really interested in the entire meeting. So if someone's just coming by to be like, here's an update from like, the big head honcho, or here's like a piece that you asked me to speak about on like how we do things in committee C, and then let them go. And you can also rearrange too, like especially with volunteers. One of the things that I think is really good is to ask, is there anyone who has to leave early today? And then make sure that the part of the agenda that they're going to be involved with is going to be happening before they leave. So, and one of the ways that you make sure that you are getting to the things you need to get to is you take notes. And so when you build your agenda for the coming week, you look at your notes from the past week. And so then you can say, like, look at, did we get this done? Did we find out the answer to that? Did a decision get made here? And then, you have kind of like where the conversation left off last time, so that you can pick up right where you left off. I highly recommend rotating who takes the notes for meetings. And I also think it should not be the only woman at the meeting regularly, and it should not be like the only woman or femme-identified person at the meeting. There's no one in this earth that leaves the womb knowing how to take notes. Like, you don't leave the womb knowing how to wash dishes or sort laundry or take notes. So when you say like, oh, I'm just not good at taking notes, what I think most of us hear is you don't like to do it. No one loves to do it, but it is a thing that needs to be done to make sure that the meeting is good. One way that is great now, like, it doesn't have to be one person, it could be one main person, but you can distribute it a little bit more by using a tool like Etherpad, which I know everyone here is familiar with. So if you've got like a Etherpad document, everyone can take notes collaboratively, and it takes off the onus of one person constantly typing and never having a chance to participate in the actual meeting. So your meeting's going to be great, right? Like, it's once you have all of these things in place, like, what could go wrong? Well, let's talk about that. So sometimes there are things that you get, like, where someone brings up a topic and it turns out no one knows the answer. And folks kind of want to discuss it anyway, which is nothing good comes out of like, well, I have this, I think I remember reading something in Wired like last year about this thing. Don't make a decision based on that. You put a committee, like, let them investigate, and then make a decision when you have more information. So let's talk about some of the other things that can go wrong. When nobody follows the agenda. So what do? This is, you took all this time, you wrote out a great agenda, you're going to chair this meeting. Once one person is allowed to ramble off agenda, then everyone else jumps in to make sure that their thing gets heard before the agenda or before the meeting is over. And that's like total chaos. Nobody wants that. So when you are chairing a meeting that has an agenda, you have to be explicit, and you're like, well, let's start with whatever agenda item number 1 is called, and then we'll go to agenda item number 2. So you help remind people constantly that you're following the agenda. People are going to chit chat at the beginning of meetings, and it's nice, but like you got to make a separate place for team building and socialization outside of your meeting. So some of the things you can say are, we've got a lot to get through today. Or if folks want to stick around and chit chat after the meeting, that's cool. Or I'm pretty sure that meetings that ran over their allotted time is how we ended up with the evil empire. Just kidding. Let's look at agenda item number 1. So, if you have to be funny or firm or whatever you're comfortable with as a meeting chair, like you have to get everybody back to the agenda, even if it seems like not fun. Okay. And then another thing that can happen in your meeting is that people so the person who is associated with agenda item number 2 is talking, and then somebody else is interrupting. And this is like, it's not good. And so one of the things you can start doing is to model apologizing. So if you accidentally interrupt someone, you can say oh, I'm sorry, it seems like you weren't finished, go ahead. You can also ask people to virtually raise their hands if they have a comment on what's happening now. So if you're doing an all video call, people can do this. If you're doing a text based, a phone call but with text, you can do a little circle with a / as looks like a head with a raised arm in the chat, and then folks can let the rest of the meeting know they have something to interject, and the meeting chair can say oh, hey, it looks like Priya's got something to add to this. And then you have them add and then come back to the person who's talking. Sometimes you get people that are just bad. They're just not bad people, they're just bad at being in meetings, and they interrupt a lot. So some of the things that you might say is hang on, I wanted to hear the rest of Julie's point. Or, I don't think Juan was finished. Juan, do you want to finish? Or, if you have to get a little more hardball, you can be Margaret was still talking. Or, let Mike finish, and then you can talk next. Or it might, it's but you have to say something and keep saying something until people are she's going to interrupt the interrupting. So it's hard. And if you're not used to interrupting yourself, then it can feel weird to interrupt the interrupter. You'll get over it, but it will take a little practice, and that's okay. Just make sure you don't use your newfound interrupting skill for evil. So, and then this is a kind of a really specific kind of interrupting, when you're in a meeting and someone keeps trying to revisit decisions from last week, and it's turns into this filibuster. It's not fair to everyone who has in good faith participated in the process and come to a decision. Maybe you're all right, we're gonna, we have course of action 1 or course of action 2. Everyone discussed it. The group decide course of action number 1. And someone keeps bringing up course of action number 2 in hopes of wearing people down so that they eventually are fine, you win, even though the entire rest of the group came to consensus to do it the other way. So once you let this happen, you open this Groundhog's Day kind of alternate reality for your meetings where everything comes back over and over and over again. So you cannot let this person change a decision that was come to on consensus. So you can say I know you have reservations about Plan X. The group has agreed to move forward, and we're not going to discuss it again until 3 months from now when we see how Plan X is working. And, just keep saying that. Or you can say it isn't fair for you to keep questioning the group's decision, and eventually I'm going to ask you to not come to these meetings. So sometimes people just get excited, and they especially early morning meetings.
We have 5 more minutes.
Okay, 5 more. Perfect. I'm almost there. when people didn't know a topic was going to be discussed, they can't be prepared. So you can say like send info to the groups on the new topic, and we'll put it on the agenda for next week, unless it's really, really urgent. So this kind of models those things. You can say that's not on this week's agenda. We can put on next week's agenda, or why don't you research that and get back to the group next week? Or the two of you could just decide what to do and email the group about your decision. So notes, moderation, and an advanced agenda, and your meetings are going to be awesome. So I'll take questions for the last couple minutes, and hopefully you will take my advice and have great meetings. Thanks. Should I look in the chat for questions, or do people turn on their mic? Oh yeah, thank you.
I have an Etherpad for those, and I can read them if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the first one is, I usually set regular meetings with enough time, but I make changes yearly as per time zone changes. Is that considered a good practice?
Yeah, as long as you give people lots of notice. What you don't want to do is have a meeting happening in less than a week and people still don't know what time it's going to be. As long as you have, as long as you give people a few weeks notice on when the meeting is going to be, and if it's like a really important with a lot of different people and a lot of different time zones meetings, give them like, here are the meetings for the next 6 months, or I am part of some groups that set their meetings for the year in advance. So yeah, as long as you give people notice.
Great. The second one is, what do you do when the one revisiting all items have a greater position than you?
Oh yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, so the boss keeps saying that. Yeah, I think so. That one. Like the first time that happens, you might have to just kind of suck it up. The second time you suspect that's going to happen and you're trying to like manage up, is what we call this, is you kind of push to set the parameters and say like, oh, so do we want the fastest solution or the most accurate or like the most compassionate or whatever it is? And then like, let's look at the data. Or we might say like, let's ask all of the committees and see, like, let each committee vote, and then we all will agree to abide by the decision. So you just add a little language the second time you suspect that could happen, and say, you know, like put in a lot of language about like, so we're going to do, this is what our process will be, and then we will all decide, you know, we will all agree to abide by the decision made through this process. So then later, this, like, so if it happens a second time, which it might, because a lot of people have kind of the same habits for meetings, you can say like, so if you remember, we agreed that we would look at like this kind of cost benefit or this kind of voting process, and then all abide by the decision that was made. You know, so it's, and then I guess the second thing like you could do is to appeal to someone that's like of a similar position and get their buy-in and say like, hey, you could even approach the person and say like, when you overturn the group's decisions in the meetings, it's really undermining, and I think it makes the meetings and the process just not feel good. So like, if they're approachable in that way, you could say offline like, when you do that in the meeting, it's really unhelpful and it's kind of demoralizing. I hope that helps.
The third one is, I'm terrible at interrupting people in meetings. How do you accept yourself but still not feel anxious that you might be being a jerk?
Yeah, so you could try, if you're comfortable with it, using a little bit of humor. Or sometimes it can be easier to stand up for someone else than for yourself. So if there's someone who constantly interrupts you in meetings, then you might like kind of bird dog them when they interrupt other people, and then maybe like set this culture where everybody, you know, kind of collectively keeps you from being interrupted. Like I've noticed that if I say in a meeting like, oh, I really wanted to hear the rest of Margaret's point, that like later when someone interrupts me, they'll be like, oh, I really wanted to hear the rest of Deb's point, like almost verbatim, because once you sort of set that as an acceptable thing to say in the meetings, then it becomes part of that meeting's culture. So if it helps you to like interrupt an interrupter on someone else's behalf instead of your own, that might be good and might be easier. But you can also ask a friend, you know, you can kind of jumpstart it by asking a friend like, hey, let's make sure that we really let people finish. So I hope that helps.